Hi everyone, my name is Declan McGlynn. Welcome to another Friday Forum Live, all-weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from Point Blank HQ in East London. Today we're joined by Point Blank instructor Anthony Chapman to take a look at iZotope's new mixing plugin, Neutron. So today is all about iZotope's unique new plugin, Neutron, and showing you how it could help your mixes. But if you want to learn a lot more about how to take your music to the next level, including engineering, sound design, composition, mastering, and a whole lot more, check out our diploma courses at pointblankmusicschool.com. And remember, we're completely live today, so get your questions for Anthony in the comments, and we'll get to them a little later on. Welcome back.
Lovely to be here. Yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, it has, yeah.
But of course, it's another iZotope plugin. So
it is. Suddenly you're
I'm
back.
here again.
Yeah. iZotope fanboy.
Absolutely. Always.
And
my students will all tell you that as well. I'm always going on about it, yeah. And I'm always going on about Alloy, which is
which is
Neutron
the predecessor.
Neutron, I feel, is the kind of spiritual successor.
So Ally 4 is not going to happen?
Well, Alloy 3, yeah, it looks, I think Neutron is kind of taking the place of Alloy 3. So, yeah.
So as a fanboy, first impressions?
Very, very impressed. The main thing is forgetting about any of the sort of stunt stuff, you know, the stuff that's made the press about this plugin. As ever, iZotope's DSP just sounds fantastic, I think. I think it's really, really underappreciated by a lot of people. The sheer quality of the EQs, the compression and stuff like that. I think partly because they don't make their plugins look like old hardware. So I think sometimes people don't get so jazzed
it's
about it.
It's funny that like the aesthetic makes you feel like it's a bit more digital.
Yeah.
Just because it doesn't look old. Yeah.
But it works really, really well. So even if, for me, with Neutron, if I was just using Neutron as a straight up channel strip, EQ, compression, exciter, transient shaper, I'd love it. I'd be really, really happy with it.
So before we get ahead of ourselves, what is Neutron and what does it do?
So at its heart, it is, as I would say, I don't know if iZotope would disagree, but it's a spiritual successor to Alloy, and Alloy was the iZotope channel strip plugin. So EQ, dynamics, so compressor and gate, exciter, which is essentially adding a little bit of distortion, transient shaping, and there was also a limiter on the end. There was also a de-esser in Alloy. Now, with Neutron, we don't have the gate, we don't have the de-esser, but I think they've added more than enough to make it worthwhile. So for me personally, I'm probably still going to have Alloy 2 around a little bit because there's certain things I really like about it. I think the de-esser is good. The gate was always a bit of a problem for me because the one thing that was missing from it was it didn't have a control for how much the gate reduces the signal. Oh, okay. It was always go to silence. You could just control how steep it would go. But so far so ordinary, you know, although it does sound great. But what they've added is effectively some kind of machine learning. So there's the thing that I'm sure anyone who's watching this probably has already heard about, which is the track assistant, which is essentially a little bit of, I guess you could call it AI, which you put it on an audio track, you hit the track assistant button, it listens to the audio for kind of 5 to 10 seconds, and then it applies a bunch of settings in Neutron to say, this is what I think this sound needs.
Okay.
A lot of people threw their hands up and freaked out because, it's computer's mixing for you. No, it isn't at all. This is the thing. It's not going to mix the audio for you. It's going to help you to, at the very least, start from a good position, you know. And I generally find that when I use the track assistant, it generally goes, so if I just listen to the sound, I think this is the kind of thing I want to do. Generally speaking, the track assistant goes in that direction, but it's just analysing it in a much finer way. So I always think of the track assistant as the starting point for any audio source. Then also, slightly less sexy than the track assistant, but it's got this masking meter, which basically means that every instance of Neutron in your DAW project is aware of all the other instances.
Okay.
And you can look at the masking meter and you can basically, at the top half, you can see the track you're on, let's say the kick, and the bottom half you can see any other track that you choose that has Neutron on it, so you could say the bass. Using the masking meter, it will show you which frequencies are being masked when the two sounds are playing together.
Wow, okay.
Which is incredibly, incredibly useful.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So should we take a look?
Let's.
Yeah? Okay, so if we just start, you know, in the obvious position on the kick drum of this track. This is a track by an ex-Point Blank Online student, Lucas Kaczmarek, who goes under the name The Artivist. This is a very small excerpt of it, and also I've had to strip out quite a lot of the sounds because it was a massive project. But I've just focused on this main section at the end where everything's kind of kicking off. Yeah. If we start with the kick drum, this is like our classic, you know, application of a channel strip plugin like this. And if we just have a quick listen to the track kind of as it is at the moment, and you can see, if you've used Alloy, if you've used Ozone, this is going to be very familiar to you in terms of, we've got our modules from left to right, okay? And obviously we can change the order of them as well, which is always very, very useful. Each one of them has its own dry and wet balance on it, which is really, really handy. Yep. Now, the first thing I want to do here is just listen to the kick on its own, and then I'm literally going to hit the track assistant button, and Neutron is listening to the track.
Come on, Neutron.
There we go. So this is what Neutron thinks we need to do to the kick drum as a starting position. So if I bypass, if we A-B it, so straight away, it's done what for me is that when I'm teaching mixing here, the thing I always have to impress upon students about kick drums is the importance of the top end. Like, you know, because it is very easy, especially if you're new to production, composition, to think, oh, bass drum, therefore the bass is the most important thing about it. But actually, the high frequencies are easily as important as the low frequencies, because the high frequencies place the beat in the bar, you know. High frequencies will get to you. Well, if you don't want to hear any bass, you could get some. But let's not go there. Again, my students know my opinion on NS10s, but high frequencies are going to get to you much quicker than the bass. So we need it there. And again, just think about the real world listening scenarios that most people have: full range speakers, iPhone speakers, laptops, whatever. It needs to be able to translate to that, and the high frequency of the kick drum is there. Also, I just think modern technology means we can have that punchy kick drum sound, you know. It will sound really, really nice. So straight away, this is the first thing I knew. Even when I mixed this track before I had Neutron, I needed to get more snap out of that kick drum. Now, if we look at what it's done this EQ curve. You can see it's given it a bit of a boost at the high, but down here around about 2.2K, it's just done a little notch out of it. Very subtle. Just gives it what this does for me is it gives this sort of its own space a bit more. You know, I do this quite a lot. Like if I've got a very round kick drum, sometimes I'll do a cut here just to almost sort of give the low frequencies their own space, then sort of have a little, I don't know, almost like an exclusion zone, which kind of separates everything else from it. Not always, you know, it's something that I often try. And it's also used the exciter here. Now the exciter is essentially distortion. It's adding distortion, harmonic distortion. This has done it in multi-band, okay? So it's set it so that this is, we'll have a listen. That's the first band there, and then this is the second one. And you hear how it's really adding, it's really, really just starting to push that little really, really high frequency element. And also the mix of each side here, it's only got kind of 30% in there. So I find that really interesting that this algorithm is actually doing quite subtle things. Now, I'm not trying to show off, but if you go back to my Ozone videos, one of the things that I always go on about is, with the exciter, is pull the mix down, like go quite low, 20-25% before you do anything. And I felt when I saw Neutron doing this, I was like, oh, I felt quite good. I was like, oh, the machine is doing the same thing that I normally talk about. We've also got the compressor here as well. And this is really interesting. what it's done is it's compressing the mid-range, but not the very, very low and the very, very high, okay? So this is really, really interesting. So it's just pushing down ever so slightly. And this is what I really like about Neutron as an educational tool for us, is that it's achieving really good results by actually working quite subtly. It's not doing anything completely crazy. So again, if I bypass that, there we go. Now the one thing it hasn't used is the Transient Shaper. Now, for this track, if we listen to it in context, it's cutting through quite well, but I would be tempted to just try a tiny little bit of boosting the transients in the really high frequencies, just to make sure we're getting it coming through all the time. Just like that, kind of like 3 to 4 dB on that high frequency there. So if we take out that solo. So that's working really well for me. If we bypass the whole thing,
pretty significant now.
yeah. And this is really what I want to try and bring home about Neutron, is that Neutron's, and the track assistant especially, it's not there to do your job for you as a mix engineer. I always think of it as it's there to get you started. It's there to say, look, I've listened to the sound, start here, and then everything else that you want to do is going to be subjective, and you know, AI as we know it, or machine learning as we know it now, is not going to be capable of making those judgments, because it doesn't understand the context, it doesn't understand what kind of music it is, what the language of that genre of music is at this time. So so that's essentially the basics. Now, I'm not really going in depth into the individual modules themselves, partly because they're very similar to the way they would function in Ozone, the way they would function in Alloy 2. It's actually a lot closer to Ozone 6 or 7. One thing I will say is, if you look here, we can turn on dynamic EQ for any node. So you can mix and match between regular EQ and dynamic EQ. So if I quickly just try on the snare here. So again, with the snare, let's hit the track assistant. And if Lucas is watching this video, he's probably saying, I didn't have a snare in this track, and I just added it for the purposes of the Friday Forum Live. So don't freak out.
Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, it's just done a little bit of brightening up there. So you see what I'm saying? It's like in the default mode, because if we drop this down, you see we can change, we can make it aggressive or we can make it subtle.
Okay.
In the medium mode, it tends to be relatively measured about what it's doing. You can also choose these different presets for the track assistant itself. So far, I've just been leaving it on broadband clarity, but it could be, let's try it. Let's put it on upfront mid-range. Let's see if we get a different result.
It's not actually doing anything that shapes the character of the sound, it's only doing functional,
Exactly.
corrective stuff.
Yep. Now this is interesting. This has done something quite different. You see what it's done here?
Very different, yeah.
It's put a dynamic EQ on the, what frequency we got there? About 136 hertz. Now that, you remember I was saying before, how sometimes on a kick drum, say, I would kind of have a bit of a notch. That's the kind of area that I would do that. You can see every time the snare's playing, it's just pushing back there. Again, if we A-B it, you hear the body that it's adding to it, like this around here.
That like 250 or whatever that yellow one is quite significant as well.
So again, really subtle, and I love it. It's really, you know, I just love it as a starting point, you know. I actually, a rock record that I've been mixing, just as an experiment, I put it on a bunch of the drum tracks and just ran the track assistant across them just to see what it would do. And everything that it was doing when I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, I think it sounds better. Like, it just sounds more, you know, it's got an analysis that it can make that I can't make. You know, I can't, when I hear the audio again, my brain doesn't, it's not quite at the level of translating it into like digital information that I can, you know, interpret accurately.
Also, you have the downside of the space you're in.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas it's the clean digital audio.
Exactly.
Free of acoustic interference.
Absolutely.
That it's
yeah. So, you know, other than that, in terms of the individual modules, classic iZotope, you know, they can all be multi-band. So for example, with the Transient Shaper here, with just one band turned on here, that's going to be a broadband Transient Shaper, okay? But we could, for example, put all 3 bands on and then just focus on the mid-range. So, you know, it's the Transient Shaper in Alloy I absolutely love. Like, I've always absolutely loved it, and this is essentially a continuation of the same thing. One of the things I really love about it that you don't get in, for example, Bittersweet, the freebie from Flux, which is quite a nice little processor for just adding or reducing snap, but it's the control over the sustain. That's what's really important, because that's where you can really change the shape of the sound. But you know, the actual processors themselves, I think, are fantastic, like really, really good. You'll notice down here as well, the Neutrino mode. So when you do the track assistant, usually it will choose one of the modes here to fit the audio that's coming in. It doesn't always get it right. I'd say it gets it right at least 75, 80% of the time. But generally speaking, setting the mode there will mean that the processing that you're doing within the rest of the plugin will be suited to that kind of source broadly. But yeah, you know, overall, in terms of the track assistant and the individual processors, love it, like absolutely brilliant. So, should I move on to the masking meter as well? Because this is the other big kind of unusual feature. Because this is the kind of stuff that I want to focus on, the stuff that makes Neutron something new. You know, because a channel strip plugin is not something new. It's a fantastic channel strip plugin, but it's not necessarily something that you're going to get super excited about. However, this is something that I genuinely think is exciting. So if we look at here on our instance of Neutron on the kick, and you'll notice here that I've named it here, kick. So basically every instance of the plugin that you put in, it will name it automatically, but you can go in and name it yourself. So I tend to put it in, name it after whatever's on the track. So there's the kick drum, and if I go to the bass here, and we have a look here, and I've got that one named as the bass. Now, as well as the track assistant, the other kind of intelligent feature that we have is the masking meter. And if I turn this on, we can choose to view another plugin's spectrum and EQ curve in this window. So if I show the kick drum, so this is the kick drum at the bottom, and this is the bass here. And then we've got a meter along the top here. And if I run the track, and then turn up the sensitivity here, it will start to show me the areas of the frequency range which are being masked. So essentially, it's becoming difficult to hear these frequencies because of the way these two sounds interact. Okay. Wow. So if I crank this up a bit more, sometimes it takes a little while to respond. So you can see there, very, very low frequency. There's some issues here. Okay. So, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, so you just choose which one you want.
Exactly.
To dominate that space.
Exactly. So there's various ways we can approach this. You see, it's quite a lot here is going on. So there's various ways we can approach this. We could try, I guess it really depends on your mixing philosophy, depends on the kind of music you're doing. I tend to be a believer in the kick, especially in dance music and electronic music in general, the kick drum, the super low frequencies, the kick drum should kind of have that to itself, you know, kind of 60 hertz and below. The bass should be a little bit higher up because I want it to be fat, but I want it to be melodic as well. So I'm thinking here, this kind of stuff here, what I might try and do is roll off the bass a bit here to basically let that low frequency stuff of the kick drum come through. So, you know, I've got a shelf here, or I can switch that to a high pass. And you see how the masking meter starts to fall away as well.
Yeah, I mean,
so
you can hear it though before that happens. You know?
Yeah, so it's detecting straight away that there is, it has opened up a bit. We can also, still a little bit there, so maybe if I grab this node here, I'm just going to make the Q a bit narrower. And just put a bit of a cut around here. And then if we maybe just listen to the kick and the bass together. Yeah, so they're sitting together lovely now. And the thing about this bass is, you know, like I said, I don't want it to be sitting there in those really, really low frequencies. I want it to be melodic and I want it to get that warmth across. But the kick drum is where I want to have the real low frequencies happening.
Yeah.
So this is phenomenally useful. Now, let's check one other combination, because there's another way we can address this. If we look at the snare here, and then so we've got this little kind of like sort of analog bell type synthy sound here. And if we put the masking meter on, and let's have a look at the snare and this, and let's see, are we getting any? So you see how different the masking meter looks, because there's a lot of harmonics. Because we're dealing with something higher frequency, more melodic, especially that kind of bell sound, there's going to be loads of harmonics in there. So we're starting to see areas where there might be masking that we want to deal with. Now, I just want to get that meter to come up again. So if we just focus on one area here, if we look at this one, around about 400 hertz, just over 400 hertz, there's another thing that we can do here. If I click on this node here, and I enable this button here, inverse link, and then if we go down to about 400 hertz here, and I cut this here, it then boosts it on the other one. Okay, possibly a little bit much. But we can do this on various areas there. And you can, obviously using that, you can mix and match. You could cut somewhere and boost somewhere else to try and build up that harmonic relationship and kind of create a little bit of space, but it doesn't always have to be working in the same way. Yeah. And I quite like that, because it means you're not making one sound completely subservient to the other. You're finding the areas where, oh, I need to make the most of those frequencies, but here I can put it down. And then when you use inverse link, every time you do it, the opposite is happening on the other sound. So it's really, really useful. Yeah, I really love it. Now, one other thing about, there's one sound in particular I just wanted to show you, the bass sound. And this is something I always love about Ozone, I loved in Alloy, and I love in Neutron, and that's the exciter. Because for sounds like this, it's just tailor-made for it. Because you can see it looking at the spectrum, there's a really significant roll-off, sort of, when we get up to, what's that about?
It just seems like it's been EQ'd that way. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's got quite a lot of bite in it, but it doesn't have much high stuff going on. Yeah. And what might help to get it to cut through a bit would be some exciter, basically just, so like these kind of frequencies from here up. So remember, this is effectively going to add distortion. Let's try retro. These are the 4 different models of exciter you can kind of morph between. Oh yeah, tube. Tube is the one. So I'm really cranking it, and then just, you know, 50-50, and then that just going to help the character of that sound come through. And you notice here, look, the harmonics that we're now seeing higher up as well. So, you know, this isn't necessarily something new. They've tweaked it, but I always love the exciter in the iZotope plugin. It's really, really useful. It's often overlooked. I think partly because the name doesn't really, you know, tell us up front what it is, what it's going to be doing. I always say to students, it's distortion, but that's good. You know, it's good. Yeah. It's the good kind of distortion. So yeah. So I don't know if we've got any questions.
We certainly do. We've got plenty of discussion, a lot of discussion over the ethics behind the plugin. David Ball is asking.
Can I address that just for 1 second? Because I have no problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like I know a lot of other people working in the industry my age who would probably feel exactly the opposite. I really like to embrace new technology and stuff like that. And like I said, the thing that's important for me, I must admit, when iZotope announced it, I was like, ooh, I don't know about this. This sounds a bit.
Yeah.
But then once I saw it being demoed, and then once I actually used it, I realised the true point of it, of the track assistant, is that it gets you to the start. it doesn't get you to the end of what the sound. It's getting you to the start.
Yeah.
So and eventually, I think if you're a less experienced, that's code for younger, you're less experienced mix engineer, it's probably going to just teach you a little bit about how you get to those sounds that you want.
I guess a nice thing to do would be when it does a notch EQ and it cuts it, boost it to see why
see what it's done, see what it's
done
taken out. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you can just train your ear to listen for those frequencies.
Exactly.
David Bohr is asking, how do you make it adapt to all your track length when it only analyzes a portion of it? So it adapts to that portion only.
So David has basically instantly found the sort of the weakness in the track assistant.
Because obviously a snare or a vocal will change quite drastically over a whole track.
Yeah, it is something to be aware of. I mean, if it's going to be a big change on a track, to be honest, even without Neutron, before using Neutron, when I mix, if somebody sends me their tracks or their stems, as people call them now, I'm old, and stems mean something different to me. But they send me the stuff, and if it really is different from one section to the other, I'll often just make another track and just, separate it. Just so if this section, the snare is really different, I'm going to put it on another track. Just so I can know that I can process it separately.
Yeah, I guess you would do that anyway, regardless.
But with David has kind of isolated, the almost like the elephant in the room, and it can't basically is the short answer. I mean, you could maybe automate, switch into different presets. Like you could do track assistant, save it as a preset, go to a different point in the track, do track assistant, save it as a preset. Automate it switching between the presets, but then it's going to depend on what kind of audio it is. Are you going to have time to do the preset switch without everything freaking out and you hearing it? Yeah. My advice for those kind of tracks, anyway, even without Neutron, is kind of if it gets really different, put it on a different track.
Yeah, you can always freeze and flatten.
Exactly.
So just freeze and flatten that bit, freeze and flatten the next bit, and then work from there.
Yeah.
Another question. Frank Van Meel is asking, how will Neutron apply for hardstyle?
Oh my lord! Okay, that's a good question.
It's got the transient designer, so
yeah, the transient designer, the exciter as well is going to be very, very useful. Funny enough, hardstyle is something I have mixed a few hardstyle tracks with an ex-student, a guy called Russell King, who may be watching. I don't know, but although I'm not sure he calls it hardstyle. That world is a mystery to me because there's tiny little changes in sound and it has a different name. But broadly speaking, hardstyle, hardcore, and I think it could be really, really useful, especially in terms of the exciter, the transient shaper, and just the EQ as well. But the thing about that kind of music is that the rules of mixing that maybe we would normally work with go out of the window completely. So I know when I worked on those tracks with Russell, I was just completely, I got him to send me a bunch of tracks because I was hearing stuff and thinking, there's no bass. And I was like, can you send me some commercial tracks just so I know? And they had no bass. I'm like, okay, that's just what. And basically, and the kick drum is like the whole thing, basically. It's like 80% of the track. Like I remember he sent me photos of a Logic session where he'd made a new kick drum. He'd spent a whole day working on it. And it had like about 25 tracks, loads of plugins. Oh, this is the attack, this is the sustain. It's fascinating to me because it's like, it's so alien to everything that I would normally do. So I really enjoyed working on those tracks. It's really interesting. But I think there's stuff in here that would really, really apply to that, especially the exciter. I think the exciter is going to sound fantastic in hardstyle. So. Yeah,
cool. Simple Truth is asking, I watched a whole course on Neutron and I still don't understand if the pink is supposed to be there or not for masking. So the pink means that pink is bad.
Right, okay. Hang on.
In the mask EQ.
Let's have a look again. Let's do the kick and the bass. So if I go to the bass,
I guess it's much clearer in the lower frequencies where it's thicker.
Yeah.
When you have harmonics and there's quite a lot of varying shades of pink.
Absolutely. I would always say that when I've used it, I've just looked out for. So basically, so the colours are changing dependent on the amount of masking in that frequency.
And by masking, meaning conflicting.
Yeah, basically conflicting frequencies, which mean you can't really pick out those frequencies between the two sounds, or you end up in a situation where the frequencies are actually you can't really hear them at all.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, I would say just use it as a guide. So for example here, we can see this one, when I put the sensitivity there, we can see this frequency here sometimes is a bit of a problem. But you see, as I leave it on, it creeps back down again. It's not too much of a problem. I think this one here and the really low stuff was the big problem. So don't worry too much about the kind of specific colours, but the deeper the colour, like the redder the colour is, the more and more masking there is.
Okay.
So
I think what masking will be really useful for is achieving loudness, because so much of what happens to a limiter is that it's being hit by bass early first, and the rest.
Bass has the most energy in it. Yeah. So
if you can nail the bass, you're going to be able to achieve more loudness.
That thing about on some kick drums and stuff like that, where there's a cut surprisingly low. That's just something that I spotted in commercial masters. Somebody sent me. I wish I could remember it's someone who's done stuff on Mad Decent, and it was a track from their album, and somebody sent it to me as a reference for mastering a track, and I was like, the whole thing was like RMS -2, so I was already like, okay. But when I looked at the spectrum, there was this huge like whoop, like around 130 hertz, and I was like, what's going on there? Then I got some other tracks, like similar kind of tracks, and I was seeing it again and again and again. And when I tried it myself, what I was finding was it was giving you a couple of dB of loudness to work with. Yeah. Unfortunately, they then squashed it to -2 RMS, but hey,
still, still a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rafez Vieira is asking, do you think it's better to use it in most of the tracks, or isn't that CPU effective, or is it better to use it as groups on the channel?
That's a really good point, actually. So let me just show you something. I've got it on the drums group here, and let's just try the track assistant on this. See if I'm looking at the right one here. Here we go, right. So this is the drums bus. It kind of trips over as the DSP starts to engage. So that's what it's done to the group itself. So it's quite nice, quite a bit of clarity here.
Taking out
a little bit of muddiness and a little bump right at the bottom end to make it warm. Now here's the interesting thing. When I did this last night on the drums group, I thought it sounded terrible, what it did. But I did it first before I did any of the Neutron stuff. So I've got a feeling that because we've done Neutron on like the kick and the snare, it's almost given this a bit of a nudge towards a better sound, if you see what I mean.
Which brings me to my next question.
Well, I was going to say about that, using it on groups, it really is just a case. Yes, it will be more CPU efficient, but it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, well, someone's actually asked that very question, which says, how come when you stack Neutron, they have the same result with Track Assistant? It seems to analyze from the source regardless of where it's placed in the chain. So as in, like, it's not listening to the output of the first Neutron, it's listening to the dry output always.
Oh, interesting. I've not actually tried it.
You could just bounce it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I can't imagine a scenario where I'd want to stack it up. Perhaps there is. You see, obviously, because I'm not an expert on the I'm using AUs here, so I'm using audio units. I'm not an expert on audio units specifications, but I know different versions. I know VST3, obviously all the plugins can communicate with each other. They can also take audio from different parts of the signal path. So it's possible that Neutron is just saying whenever you initialize the track assistant, we're taking it straight from the fader. I'm going to look into that because I want to know. If anyone from iZotope's watching who wants to kind of clear it up, that would be really good.
That was from Marcus Rain, by the way. Darren H is asking, if you press learn in the masking section, will it automatically?
So let's have a look here.
Correct.
So basically what learn does...
just do it off for me. Learn.
So what learn does is it basically, it's like in Ozone, it sets the bands, it listens to the audio and it kind of sets the bands to where it thinks they would be quite complementary to the sound, okay? But if we look in here, I've just got to remember, does it function? There we go. So it doesn't actually do the masking fixes for you. It decides whereabouts the nodes should be. Okay. Now, here's
those for booster cuts though.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, the learn thing on the EQ, I would probably do that right at the beginning if I was going to do it manually, you know. The learn function is most useful if you're just using it as a channel strip and doing everything manually. This actually reminds me, this has brought me onto something very, very useful, which I haven't looked at already. So I hit learn there, and I've just ruined all of my EQ on that track. Oh no. Now, normally, as I'm sure everybody knows, with almost every plugin, when you do that, you can't undo it. But good old iZotope have given us the RX undo history in this. So this is the same as in RX. So it's absolutely, I mean, look at this. This has got the history of everything that's happened on this on this instance. So, and you can also set snapshots as well. So if you think, oh, this is sounding pretty good, set a snapshot, then you can carry on. And then if you want to go back, you can always just go back to that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is so useful.
Yeah.
Like, unbelievable, unbelievable.
Absolutely. Evan Kaplan's asking, how is Neutron on CPU?
So far, I'm finding it's okay. Now, one thing I would say, you'll notice here on this that we've got about 30% CPU at the moment, and I haven't really done too much. All I've got on this track is a bunch of audio, and I've got a few instances of Neutron, quite a few. Most of them aren't actually on at the moment. But don't let that mislead you, because this is a 4-year-old MacBook Pro 17-inch i7. So, and it's one of the ones that does have the problem with the graphics card that impacts on audio. So I would say, first off, that value could be misleading. Second off, Ableton, as I think any of us who use Ableton who are watching this, has a bit of a funny relationship with the CPU a lot of the time, and you could have almost the same project in Ableton and then in another DAW, and Ableton will have a much higher CPU hit, even if you're not using Warp or anything like that.
Or if you've seen the old 1000% CPU.
Exactly. So yeah, so I would say broadly speaking it's okay, but I would say, as with any channel strip or that kind of plugin, you should not expect to have it on every single channel. Yeah. You know, and in fact, you shouldn't. I mean, especially for a track like this, you know, a kind of 4 to the floor electronic track like this, you need to look at the most important areas: the kick, the snare, the bass. You know, maybe some of the lead sounds, whatever. Just think about the tracks that really need it. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, if you've got a brand new iMac or MacBook Pro, I think you'll probably be fine. You know, it should be okay. So yeah, don't be misled by this CPU value here, because I think it's partly this computer and it's partly Ableton Live, the way it interprets it. Yeah, Simple Truth backing that up, saying he had 10 instances on an iMac 5K 2016 with no lag whatsoever. Fantastic. Yep. He's also said Snapchat's cured my anxiety. We can all relate to that one. Oh, I'm 44 years old. Snapchat gives me anxiety. I don't understand how to use it. All right. Okay. Well, I think that is it for questions. Yeah. So unfortunately, we are out of time for today's FFL. Hope you got plenty of inspiration for the weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed Neutron and want to check that out. And if you want to learn a lot more about mixing and things that you don't have to press a button to do it for you, you can learn from Anthony. And check out our courses at pointblankmusicschool.com. We'll be back next week for a spooky Halloween special Friday forum, so we'll see you then. Cheers.